السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما، رب زدنا علما نافعا. آمين. Alhamdulillah, after completing our discussion about the essence of aql and the disagreement between scholars in understanding the nature of aql, we will move to the function of aql, which is at-ta'aqqul, understanding, al-fahm. We are moving to epistemology. Epistemology is the branch of philosophy which deals with understanding knowledge, its types, the sources of knowledge, and first and foremost, is knowledge possible or not? And as we know, the tool for understanding is aql, and this knowledge, it happens mainly in the aql. That's why we discussed about the nature and essence of aql before moving to epistemology. We are not going into the details about the Western theories about this field of epistemology. We have agreed from the beginning that we will be mainly focusing on understanding our own legacy. And sometimes we compare for the need of understanding the points in a better way. Otherwise, we are not going into that because it would unnecessarily prolong our discussion. But generally speaking, we all know that the modern Western scientific methodology has fallen into fragmentation. We talked about this in the beginning of the sessions. Western worldview, in all its branches or in all its components, has fallen into fragmentation. So the modern Western thought does not have a holistic and harmonious worldview. And they are in search of that. We refer to this search as worldview construction in the Western thought. And we have spoken about these masail. The West has fallen into fragmentation in epistemology also. Focusing on, we gave the example of a house, focusing on only one room on the expense of other rooms of the house. So focusing on only the knowledge which takes only sensory perception as its source. And they succeeded in that. The development, advancement in technology which we see is a manifestation of that. However, they failed in creating a holistic and harmonious method. So fragmentation is a khassu wasfin. It is the most specific attribute of the modern Western thought. And they fell into this fragmentation in epistemology also. So from the sources of knowledge, they took only 5 senses, sensory perception, as a source or as a reference point. And they focused on that. The other branches of knowledge, metaphysics, which is beyond sensory perception, they don't have any methodology in that. But they are forced to, because a human being, as we have said, contains an unseen realm, which is the soul. This wujud existence contains an unseen realm. The beings which are above matter. So you're forced to at least as a human being to deal with this unseen realm, the feelings inside us, the soul, the qualities of the soul, so on and so forth. So they were forced to adopt the different theories from here and there in order to fix this fragmentation to some extent. So for example, if you take the field of modern psychology. Now, psychology deals with the inner realm, which cannot be seen and perceived by five senses. So they were forced to take the knowledge from here and there, from different civilizations, in order to fix this fragmentation. Otherwise, it's a dilemma. Because as a civilization, you believe that knowledge is what can be based on only sensory perception. So if you take the medical field as an example, when you discuss about the physical diseases, you're good at that level because this is what can be seen and perceived. Even in that, they fell into fragmentation. We will come to that later on. But when you talk about psychological diseases, how will you discuss this realm of reality? Because you don't believe in the soul. For this reason, if you study the modern psychology or any other field for that matter, which cannot be based on sensory perception, you will be amazed and astonished to see the contradiction in these fields, even at the level of terminology. So for example, mental health illness. How do you define it? What do you mean by mental? What do you mean by mind? You cannot see the mind. What you can see and perceive is the brain, the body. And this is the epitome of knowledge according to your thought. So how do you deal with that? What is mental health illness? You may see the chemical changes which happen in the brain, which is a manifestation of a disorder maybe or something like that. But how will you deal with that? You don't believe in the soul. You don't believe in the inner realities. So we have already said that we should not take the Western research for granted in these matters. Some things are prevalent or some things are promoted by power, not because they are pure research. The West controls the institutions, the West has power. So the funding for research, the universities, they promote even falsehood based on that. So the problem is fragmentation. For this reason, the concept of specialization is a Western concept. It's a modern concept. And it is the manifestation of fragmentation, specialization in knowledge. And now in our times, even the Western philosophers have realized the problem in fragmentation or specialization in ulum. And some of them, they have even spoken against it. We need a holistic view or theory of knowledge. So specialization, focusing on a particular field on the expense of other fields, or focusing on a particular field without using other fields to understand that field, is a modern problem. It's a modern thing. And it's cherished. Specialization is cherished, right? And even Muslims are influenced by it. The ulum, our ulum, specialization in this is a muhaddith, that is a faqih, this is a mufassir, this is a modern thing. It was never present in this way, or this mustalah. Terminology was never used in this manner before the modern age, pre-modern age. It was never used. If you read about our scholars, you will not even find one scholar who was a specialist in a particular field and he did not know other fields. So having encyclopedic knowledge was cherished, not being a specialist. So specialism or specialization is fragmentation. This is a problem. So for example, we have in the West people writing about it, against specialization and promoting generalization, which means a scholar must have expertise in more than one field so that he can use the knowledge of other fields in understanding a matter in a particular field. Okay, so for example, the physical sicknesses. Take the example of cancer, for example. May Allah protect us from all spiritual and physical sicknesses. Now, only the modern medical science, which is physical in nature, it does not take the inner realities into consideration, is the manifestation of specialization. Why can't we, and if we don't deny these the expert opinion, or we don't deny specialization per se, but why can't we say, for example, in a particular sickness, a person may have physical reasons for that sickness and also spiritual reasons. I was reading somewhere, some modern, now this is postmodern world. That's why there are the scholars of the West who are challenging the theories and thoughts based on modernity. So they're challenging that, like here in this mas'ala, specialization. So I read somewhere, a doctor says that there can be spiritual reasons, or reasons which are beyond sensory perception, which belong to the nafs of a human being, the soul of a human being, or psychology, whatever you call it, which lead to certain sicknesses. So we are only treating the physical sickness and we are neglecting the spiritual reasons. So some of them I read says that the research has proven that one of the reasons for cancer can be the hidden anger which has settled in the nafs of a human being. I read this somewhere, wallahu alam, about this research, but this can be true. And you will see this in the works of pre-modern scholars. Like take the example of Ibn Sina. We have talked about the philosophers, we have quoted from their books. Ibn Sina was a medical expert as well. He was a doctor and a philosopher at the same time. And his book, Al-Qanun fi Tib, the canon in medicine, is one of the masterpieces in this field. And it was used as a textbook in the West for a long period of time. Perhaps they are benefiting from it even in our times. If you read this book, it is about medicine, about physical sicknesses. And in that, you will see in many places, Ibn Sina, he talks about the spiritual reasons for a particular sickness. After giving the physical, after discussing the physical reasons and the physical cures, so on and so forth, he talks about the spiritual reasons also. Okay, sometimes he says, he talks about astronomy, the change which occurs in the heavens or in the atmosphere, and it leads to certain sicknesses. So this change is, we cannot perceive it by our senses. It leads to certain sicknesses. And the cure for a particular sickness sometimes is shifting from one atmosphere, from one place to another place. They used to discuss this. Otherwise, a doctor has nothing to do with astronomy. Why is he engaging astronomy into medical science? So Ibn Sina, he used astronomy in understanding the physical ailments in his Al-Qanun fi Tib. Okay, because they were not specialists in the modern sense. So for example, we have this book by David Epstein, Range. His name is Range. Why generalists triumph in a specialized world. This is a critique of the modern idea of specialization. Why generalists, those scholars who have expertise in more than one field, they triumph, they succeed in a specialized world. Muslim scholars have also written about this in Arabic. In fact, Arabic is more rich in all ulum. Our problem is that we don't know this language. So for example, we have this book of Dr. Muhammad Hammam, Tadakhulul Ma'arif wa Nihayatut Takhassus. The interchange of knowledge, of different fields of knowledge, wa Nihayatut Takhassus, and the end of specialization, fil fikr al-Islami al-Arabi, in the Arabic Islamic thought. And he discusses about this in details. And these scholars, they prove that this is a modern thing, and it has led to many problems. So this fragmentation is a big problem in epistemology also. It affects the educational project for human beings. The modern education is based on this fragmentation, the idea of specialization. And they have focused on something which cannot be considered knowledge. They are focusing on the area which is perceived by the five senses, and that's it. This is knowledge. Even at the level of terminology, knowledge has been equated with science, which is wrong. What is the translation? If you Google it, use any translation app, you will find that ilm is translated as science. And this applies to even Islamic ulum. How do we say ilm al-hadith, the sciences of hadith? Ulum al-Quran, the sciences of Quran. Ulum al-fiqh, the sciences of fiqh. This is absurd. Science is a small and particular field or branch of knowledge. There are other branches of knowledge. The methodology which applies to this particular branch is useless, or it does not benefit. It does not apply to other branches. The scientific method applies to physical phenomenon, which we can perceive by the five senses. It does not apply to metaphysical phenomenon. That's why we have repeatedly said that the modern Western thought has deviated even from its own roots, from the Greek roots. If you read Greek philosophers, you will not find this fragmentation. There are problems also there, but you will not find this fragmentation. So epistemology is the foundation of the educational project of human beings. For this reason, it is very important to understand this fragmentation. So it is also important to differentiate between knowledge, al-ilm, and skill or craft, as-sina'ah. What is taught in our times, in schools, in universities, is skill, most of it at least. Skill, sina'ah or craft. We are producing more skillful human beings, robots, who can engage in particular works or skills and earn money or be successful in a material way. For this reason, the knowledge, the modern epistemology, Western epistemology or fields of knowledge, they don't create balanced and good human beings. This is not the purpose, because they're focused on only physical reality. For this reason, they are forced to, because a human being is not only physical body, contains a soul, he has feelings, and this has led to problems in the society, human societies. They are forced to add ethics to these fields. So we see medical ethics. Why do we add ethics to the medical science? Why can't medical science have an ethics of its own? It cannot, because they're focused on only understanding the outer reality of a human being, understanding the sicknesses and the cure of those sicknesses. That's it. So they are forced to add ethics to it in order to keep it balanced, which is increasing the fragmentation, because you're taking a subject which does not belong here, which does not belong to a particular area, and you are thrusting it on that area by hook and by crook, which is leading to more destruction. So modern education is all about skill and craft, sina'ah. It is not knowledge. The real knowledge, we can say to some extent, is social sciences. But even social sciences are appropriated by the West, because they have applied the modern scientific methodology, or the methodology which only applies to empirical science, realities which we can perceive by five senses. They have taken that methodology and applied to even social sciences. In psychology, they study a human being according to his different stages of his age, as if all human beings are same in this behavior. And they forget that human beings are not same. Every human being is unique in his psychological behavior. This is the problem. So they study the behavior of a human being at the age in his early childhood, for example, then as an adult, then as a grown man or woman, and they conclude the results and knowledge from that, which is a wrong method. And this applies to all other social sciences. For example, in politics, we have the famous philosopher Machiavelli, and justifies the means, so on and so forth. So no morality. Morality cannot be involved in politics. And this has become a basic foundation of modern politics. In statecraft, morality takes a backseat. You cannot involve morality in statecraft. Statecraft has nothing to do with morality. Problem, fragmentation. So it's very important to understand this problem of fragmentation. Another point in epistemology is, as we said, or this is the first mas'ala which is discussed in epistemology. Is knowledge possible? Can we understand the realities of things as they are? So we can have two extremes in this and a middle path. Middle path is always balanced. And Islam also promotes the middle path, balanced path. We have a lot of ayat about that. The Prophet ﷺ also emphasized on taking the middle path. So we can have two extremes. One extreme is we cannot understand anything. Knowledge is impossible. So we fall into sophistry. If we take we take this term from the Western antiquity. There were philosophers who negated the haqa'iq of ashya. They negated the realities of things. They said whatever we see is our perception. These things are not as we perceive them, and we cannot understand anything. Okay, this is one extreme. Another extreme is what we know of reality is the best we have reached. We know the reality as it is, particularly the physical reality, because we are understanding them based on our five senses. Sensory perception is the best form of knowledge, and it takes us to objectivity. So what can be perceived by five senses or sensory perception is the actual reality. And what we cannot perceive by sensory perception is either it does not exist or it's faulty perception. And this is the modern fanatic Western methodology. And as we said, we are not going into details about that. There are different shades, different trends in the West also. There are scholars, there are philosophers. We are not going into that. So the problem is here understanding the limits of sensory perception and aql also. Because as we said, the West believes in, the Western philosophers, they believe in aql. But aql for them is the function of the brain. So it's connected with the brain. Whatever happens, it happens by the brain. In the previous discussion, we did not take the Western perspective into consideration. Yeah, we did not discuss it with details. And we said we have two main opinions or viewpoints. Aql is the soul itself. Al-mujarrad anil madda, devoid of matter. And this is the viewpoint of Muslim philosophers. Number two, aql is jawhar. Number two, aql is arad. Aql is an attribute of the soul. And the soul has many other attributes. It is, the soul is a world in itself. So the soul has many other attributes, feelings and other things which we discussed. Aql is one of the main attributes of the soul. So aql is arad. It cannot exist on its own. It's not a jawhar. It exists within the soul. And this is the opinion of the mainstream scholars. Okay. The third opinion is the modern Western opinion, which is accepted in modern medical science as well. Aql is function of the brain. That's it. The chemical changes and things which happen in the brain, in different lobes of the brain. This is aql, nothing else. we have difference of opinion because we can see the brain, we can see these chemical changes, we can see the organs, the physical organs, but we cannot see the aql. Even the Western doctor or philosopher cannot see the aql. Aql is from the realm of unseen. No one can see the soul. We can see the manifestation, we can see the effects. So this is the two extremes. In the answer to this question, is knowledge possible? Can we understand things as they are? One extreme is we cannot. So whatever we see is our own perception. This is not the reality. And the other extreme is the reality is only what we can perceive by five senses. This is modern Western scientific, based on modern Western scientific methodology. The middle path is we can reach near to the reality. And this is the opinion, this viewpoint is usually unknown in these circles because it is Islamic viewpoint. And as we have said before also, Islamic viewpoints or Islamic theories in these matters about these issues are very profound, very deep, if understood properly. So the modern methodologies and science does not have answer to all these questions. And even religions, whether Eastern or Western religions, religions based on myth, religions based on culture, religions based on distorted form of divine religion, or so on and so forth, no answer. Believe me. If you study, you will realize. So Islam takes a middle path. Islam says the knowledge is possible, but only to a particular extent. We can reach near to the realities of things, even by five senses. And Islam disagrees or differs with the modern Western viewpoint and other ideologies about the sources of knowledge as well. Islam acknowledges other sources, and other than the sensory perception, as definitive sources of knowledge. We will come to that. So let's talk about limits of sensory perception and aql, reaching objective knowledge. Is it possible to reach objective knowledge about things, about realities? Yes, but only to some extent. In order to understand that, I have chosen a text, and this is how we can appreciate our turath and legacy. I have chosen a text from our early turath. This is the book of Imam al-Razi, rahimahullah. He does not need any introduction. He's one of the greatest thinkers, philosophers, scholars of our ummah, particularly in these matters. His book, المطالب العالية من العلم الإلهي، وهو المسمى في لسان اليونانيين بثيولوجيا، يعني theology، وفي لسان المسلمين علم الكلام أو الفلسفة الإسلامية. And this is one of the greatest works of Imam al-Razi about philosophy or ilm al-kalam or theology, whatever you call it. In this, and in almost all works of ilm al-kalam, usul al-fiqh, the works which talk about knowledge, its types, sources, this is the first mas'ala which they discuss. Even in small texts. Our problem in teaching Islam is also we lack contextualization. We are not able to understand the contexts of things because we don't do comparative analysis. We don't understand if this mas'ala has been discussed by a particular scholar, why is he discussing it? What is the background? Understanding these backgrounds and contexts is very important in order to understand the masail. So let's take this chapter from Al-Matalib Al-Ali and see what Imam Al-Razi has to say about this. Imam Fakhruddin Al-Razi, rahimahullah, he died in 606 after Hijrah. Okay, so he lived in 6th or 7th century after Hijrah. Al-Fasl Al-Thani, the second chapter, is about في أنه هل للعقول البشرية سبيل إلى تحصيل الجزم واليقين في هذا العلم. can the intellect, human intellect, aql, reach certainty and objectivity in this knowledge, and in this field, in matters of unseen. But of course, this is about ilmul kalam, higher realities, God, religion, ethics, angels, afterlife. But in the beginning, he has talked about the sensory perception, which is a very important discussion. أم يكتفى في بعض مباحثه ومطالبه بالأخذ بالأولى والأخلاق, or does it suffice to stop at أولى, the most appropriate knowledge, or the knowledge which is near to certainty? So can we reach certainty? Can we reach objectivity? Or does it suffice to take the best, أولى, the most appropriate? That means we have reached the best opinion, and that's it. We cannot reach the full reality. Okay, so this is a very important chapter. See, we will read some lines and we will summarize it. He says, رأيت في بعض الكتب, I saw in some works of philosophy, of science, أنه نقل عن عظماء الحكمة وأساطين الفلسفة أنهم قالوا, I saw in some works that it has been narrated from the great scholars of philosophy and the polymaths, yani the greatest scholars of philosophy and hikmah, that they have said, الغاية القصوى في هذا الباب, in the chapter of unseen or higher realities, the best we can reach is al-akhdhu bil-awla wal-akhlaq, is taking the most appropriate or the best opinion, or which means reaching near reality, reaching near certainty or objectivity, not attaining the objectivity itself. This is a beautiful opinion. You will not find this in the Western epistemology or even in the Eastern philosophies. This is specific with Muslim civilization. All these balanced and deep and profound discussions and opinions. Because our scholars, after taking aql and the human knowledge into consideration, they used it, they benefited from it. The main source of our scholars is the book of Allah, is the revelation, which is definitive, which comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the vantage point of our scholars, which no other religion has, no other system has. So he says, the best scholars, the greatest in knowledge about philosophy, they have said that in order to understand the realities, or is knowledge possible, they say, well, we can reach the best knowledge or the most appropriate knowledge, which is near certainty or objectivity, but we cannot attain objectivity in itself. We cannot reach objectivity and certainty by relying on our senses and our aql only. This is the point. The wahi which comes from Allah is based on certainty, but based on our own senses, whether they are the physical senses, which are 5 senses, or the inner senses, aql, we cannot reach objectivity. وَالتَّمَسُّكُ بِالْجَانِبِ الْأَفْضَلِ الْأَكْمَلِ, and taking what is the best in it. وَأَمَّا الْجَزْمُ الْمَانِعُ مِنَ النَّقِيضِ, and as far as the objectivity which repels the opposite, which means it is objective knowledge or certain knowledge, without any doubt, فَقَدْ لَا يُمْكِنُ تَحْصِيلُهُ فِي بَعْضِ الْمَبَاحِثِ, we cannot reach to this objectivity in some mabahith, some discussions or some areas of this field. وَلِلْقَائِلِينَ بِهَذَا الْقَوْلِ أَنْ يَحْتَجُّوا بِوُجُوهٍ, and then he discusses about the evidences of this qawl, evidences of this viewpoint. And these evidences are very interesting, because in the beginning he discusses about the 5 senses. He says the 5 senses, or the knowledge which we acquire from the 5 senses, which is one of the definitive sources of knowledge, even according to Muslims and according to the West also, because West only considers 5 senses as the definitive source of knowledge. Anything beyond that, they don't accept it, or they don't accept it as reality. Even the 5 senses are deficient in their perception. There are deficiencies, weaknesses in 5 senses. And the subject was also taken by Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah, in his great work, Mishkatul Anwar wa Misfatul Asrar. Yani we should understand our legacy. These are not works which should be studied only in madrasas without understanding the contexts. Our scholars have produced some great knowledge for us, which we can relate to if we understand it properly from the best teachers. We understand it based. We base our understanding on and before understanding these books, we have the basic understanding of these matters. This is important. See, for example, in this work, which is a work of philosophy, epistemology, theology, all these fields have been combined in this beautiful work. Yani, this book of Imam al-Ghazali is the explanation of the concept of nur, light, mentioned in the ayah of nur in the Quran. Allahu nuru samawati wal ard. Allah is the nur of the heavens and the earth. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explains the meaning of that nur by an example. مثل نوره كمشكاة إلى آخر الآية. Here he talks about, because he's discussing about nur, he talks about the nur of the eye, the light of the physical eye by which we perceive, we see things. And he talks about the deficiencies in that perception. So for example, he says, اعلم, you should know, أن نور بصر العين موسوم بأنواع من النقصان. The nur of the eye, the light of the eye, the physical eye by which we perceive things, we see things, it contains many types of nuqsan, many types of deficiencies. Then he has talked about 7 types of deficiencies. So he says, فَإِنَّهُ يُبْصِرُ غَيْرَهُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ نَفْسَهُ. The first deficiency is it can perceive other things. It cannot perceive itself. Eye in itself, the physical eye, as we know, contains darkness inside. It cannot perceive itself. Number 1. Number 2, وَلَا يُبْصِرُ مَا بَعُدَ مِنْهُ وَلَا مَا قَرُبَ مِنْهُ قُرْبًا مُفْرِطًا. It cannot perceive, it cannot see what is very far away from it or what is very near. If you bring something very near to the eye, it cannot see it. And if you, this eye, physical eye, cannot see things which are very far away. Number 2. Number 3, وَلَا يُبْصِرُ مَا هُوَ وَرَاءَ حِجَابٍ. The eye cannot see which is beyond veil, beyond a wall, beyond a hurdle. We cannot see. Number 5, وَيُبْصِرُ مِنَ الْأَشْيَاءِ ظَاهِرَهَا دُونَ بَاطِنَهَا. I can only see the appearance, outer reality of a thing. I cannot perceive inner reality. So I can see the stable outer reality. I cannot see the atoms inside. This table is made of atoms. All matter is made of atoms. I cannot see the inner realities. I can see the outer reality only. This is another nuqsan. These are all deficiencies. وَيُبْصِرُ مِنَ الْمَوْجُودَاتِ بَعْضَهَا دُونَ كُلِّهَا. From the existent things, I can see only some and cannot see other realities which are beyond the quwwah of the eye. وَيُبْصِرُ أَشْيَاءَ مُتَنَاهِيَةً. I can see things which are mutanahiyah, which are finite. Things with a particular dimension, shape, weight. وَلَا يُبْصِرُ مَا لَا نِهَايَةَ لَهُ. I cannot perceive things which are infinite. وَيَغْلِطُ كَثِيرٌ فِي إِبْصَارِ. And these are 7 deficiencies, weaknesses of the physical eye. He's talking about eye. وَيَغْلِطُ كَثِيرًا فِي إِبْصَارِ. And even in this perception, what I sees is limited perception. It cannot see the reality. And what it sees, it commits a lot of mistakes in that. فَيَرَى الْكَبِيرَ صَغِيرًا. I sees what is big in origin as small. وَالْبَعِيدَ قَرِيبًا. Something which is far, I sees it near. وَالسَّاكِنَ مُتَحَرِّكًا. Something which is in the condition of sukoon, mutaharrikan. It sees it moving. Something which is not moving, I sees it moving. Wal mutaharrika sakin. Something which is moving, I sees it. And something which is in movement, motion, I sees it at rest. For example, the shadow is moving, we see it at rest. Human being is moving, basically everything is in haraka in this universe. فَهَذِهِ سَبْعُ نَقَائِسَ لَا تُفَارِقُ الْعَيْنَ الظَّاهِرَةِ. These are 7 deficiencies which don't leave the physical eye. فإن كان في الأعين عين منزهة عن هذه النقائص كلها فليت الشعر هل هو أولى باسم النور أم لا. So if from the eyes, yani the tool which we use for perception. If we have an eye which does not contain these deficiencies, does it deserve the title of Noor more, or this eye which has these deficiencies? So he talks about the inner eye, which is the eye of the heart or eye of the aql. And then he talks about the deficiencies even in that eye, the spiritual eye, which is the eye of the heart or the aql. He talks about the deficiencies. Imam al-Razi has also taken the same discussion. See how beautifully they discuss this matter. Al-Hujjatu Ula, we will not go into the details, we will take the highlights. He says, Inna adhar al-ma'lumati li jami' al-uqala. The most apparent of the information or ilm for all people of intellect is hal huwa ilm al-insani bi dhatihi al-makhsusa. The knowledge of a human being about his own being. This is the nearest and the most apparent of knowledge. Yani the realization of my own self. Wa ma'rifatuhu bi nafsihi al-makhsusa. The knowledge of my body and my being, and the knowledge of my nafs, the knowledge of my identity, my psychology, my soul. This is the greatest form of knowledge, the most apparent knowledge, and the nearest to us. So our knowledge about ourselves is the greatest knowledge. ثم هذا العلم مع أنه أظهر العلوم. In spite of the fact that this is the most apparent form of knowledge, وأجل المعارف, and the best form of knowledge, قد بلغ في الصعوبة والخفاء إلى حيث عجزت العقول عن الوصول إليه. It can reach difficulty, and this knowledge can be so hidden that the human intellect has does not have any reach to it. So even in understanding our own nafs, for example, the soul, human intellect cannot understand the soul. Is it the body? Is it energy? We have talked about the soul, nafs, when we discussed about the essence of the aql. The body also, there are realities which we cannot understand. So in spite of the fact that this knowledge is the most apparent, it is the nearest to us, there is su'uba, difficulty in understanding our own self, our own being. فإذا كان الحال في, this does not need proof, this is agreed upon. وإذا كان الحال في أظهر المعلومات كذلك. Now, if this is the condition of the most apparent of knowledge, فالحال في أبعد الأشياء أن مناسبة الأمور المعلومة للخلق كيف يكون. Now, what is your opinion about the condition of the things which are not related to us, which are not near to us, which are different from us? So if we cannot understand our own being, our own self, and in entirety, we have difficulty in understanding, how can we understand things which are not related to us? وهذه الحجة إنما تتم بتقرير مقدمات. يعني this main proof will be established by some introductions. And in the introduction, he talks about this matter in more details. And he's discussing about the limits of the sensory perception and even the aql. Aql also has limits. So this claim of reaching objective knowledge and certainty by our five senses and aql is a false claim. We can never reach objectivity and certainty by our five senses and by the aql. We can reach near to objectivity. We can take the best view of a particular thing or reality. We cannot understand. For this reason, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran has always negated all-encompassing knowledge from human beings. All-encompassing knowledge only belongs to Allah. لا يحيطون بشيء من علمه. No one can encompass the knowledge of Allah except what Allah gives to human beings. وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Above a knowledgeable person is another being who is knowledgeable. We can never reach certainty. Okay, so we should not be arrogant of in these matters. We have talked about the Western methodology, worldview, when we discussed about worldview construction. Conquering nature. Yeah, how West has destroyed the balance of nature because of this methodology. The methodology is false, problematic. West can never create harmony in wujud, in existence. So let's read about these muqaddimat, some of them at least. Al-muqaddimatul ula, the first introduction, inna adhhar al-ma'lumati li kulli ahad. The most apparent of knowledge or information for everyone, dhatuhu al-makhsusa, is his own being. And this is the nearest, the most apparent. وَالَّذِي يَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّ الْأَمْرَ كَذَلِكَ. And the proof of it is أَنَّ كُلَّ مِنْ عِلْمٍ أَنَّ كُلَّ مَنْ عَلِمَ شَيْئًا فَلَا بُدَّ وَأَنْ يَعْلَمَ كَوْنَهُ عَالِمًا بِذَلِكَ الشَّيْء. The best proof of it is when anyone from human beings thinks that I know a thing, أن كل من علم شيئا, anyone who understands a thing, فلا بد وأن يعلم كونه عالما بذلك الشيء. Before that, he should be sure that he understands that thing. And if you don't understand the faculty by which you are understanding that thing, you're not understanding it. ولذلك فإنه يقول, that's why he says أدركت هذا الشيء وعرفته. I understood this thing and I have knowledge of this thing. إلا أن علمه بكونه عالما بذلك الشيء مسبوق بعلمه بذاته المخصوصة. But understanding a particular thing is preceded by understanding your own that. If you don't understand your own self, own being, by which you understand another thing, you cannot say I have understood that thing, because you have not understood your own faculty by which you are understanding that thing. Okay, لأن من لم يعلم ذاته, because the one who has not understood his own being, كيف يمكنه أن يحكم عليها بكونها عالمة بذلك العلوم. How can he say about that being that it understands another thing? This is the point. If you don't understand your being, you cannot say my being is understanding another thing. So the first step is understanding your being, which is impossible. And then he discusses other points. We'll not go into the details. Al-Muqaddimah al-Thaniya, the second foundation or the second introduction, he says, في تقرير أن علم كل أحد بذاته المخصوصة علم في غاية الصعوبة والخفاء. That the knowledge of anyone about his being, about himself, is hidden knowledge or difficult knowledge. والذي يدل عليه أن المشار إليه لكل أحد بقول أنا إما أن يكون هو هذا الهيكل المشاهد. Because for everyone, when we point to ourselves, we say I, أنا, I. Either he's pointing to the body, الهيكل المشاهد, the body which can be seen, perceived, أو يكون جسما من الأجسام الموجودة داخل هذا الهيكل, or the different organs or the body which is inside this outer body. أو يكون صفة من صفات هذا الهيكل, or it is an attribute in this body. أو يكون جوهرا مجردا عن هذا البدن وعن علائقه, or it is something which is devoid of matter, the soul, which does not belong to this realm. وهذه الأقسام الأربعة, these four types, the outer body, the inner body, the attributes, and the soul, which contains those attributes. قد حارت عقول العقلاء فيها. The intellects of the best thinkers have become confused in these four types. حارت, يعني they were not able to reach any certainty about all these four types: the outer body, the inner body, the attributes, and the soul which contains those attributes, which is devoid of matter, which is not made of matter. وَدَارَتْ رُؤُوسُهُمْ فِي تَعْيِينِهَا. And their heads moved in specification of these things. Yani their heads, their uqul, their minds were not able to specify anything. وَمَنْ تَأَمَّلَ فِي مَبَاحِثِ كَلَامِ النَّفْسِ. Whoever reflects properly about the discussions in psychology, understanding the nafs, يجد أن هذه المسألة قد بلغت في الصعوبة إلى غاية القصوى. He will realize that this mas'ala in difficulty has reached its peak. فثبت أن هذا العلم صعب غامض. So this proves that this particular ilm about our own nafs, about our own that, is a very difficult and hidden ilm. Now, what he is trying to prove is that we are not even able to understand the best knowledge, the nearest knowledge, and the most apparent to us. That is knowing our own self. Now, if we are not able to understand our own self, how can we be sure about things which are outside, which are perceived by the self? This is the point. Al-Muqaddimatu Thaniya. But at the same time, remember, as we said, our scholars, they don't say we cannot understand the realities of things. So we become sophists. It was a group of philosophers who, in the antiquity, Western antiquity, and in the Greek philosophy, Greek civilization, they denied the realities. They said there is no reality. We cannot understand anything. This is all a mirage or something, and this is a dream. And skepticism is a modern word for the same thing, with some differences. We are not going, there are different shades and there are different discussions. We will not go into that. So Muslim scholars are not skeptics or sophists. They only want to make us understand that the tools and the source which we are very sure about, that they will lead to certainty and objectivity, is not the case. We can reach near to certainty and objectivity. Okay, so when in even the commoners, those who are not into philosophy, science and stuff, any human being, when we talk about higher realities, they involve logic into that, and science. They say, oh, this is unscientific, this is illogical. Belief in angels, do you believe in angels in 21st century? So they involve logic and science because they think that the knowledge which is based on science and scientific method is objective knowledge. So anything which cannot be proven by this method is absurd. That's why they say, oh, this is illogical, without realizing that logic itself, with all its types, does not lead to certainty, without realizing the fact that 5 senses, which is the quintessence of science, does not lead to certainty. This is the point. Okay, so he says in the third muqaddimah, inna qad bayyana anna adhhar al-ma'lumati huwa ilmu kulli ahadin bi dhatihi al-makhsusa wa nafsihi al-mu'ayyana. We have explained and emphasized on the fact that the most apparent of knowledge is the knowledge of a person about his own being and nafs. وَبَيَّنَّا أَنَّهُ مَعَ كَوْنِهَا أَظْهَرُ الْمَعْلُومَاتِ. And we have also explained that in spite of the fact that it is the most apparent form of knowledge, the nearest, the best form of knowledge, فَقَدْ بَلَغَ الْعِلْمُ بِهَا إِلَى غَايَةِ الْقُصْوَى فِي الصُّعُوبَةِ وَالْخَفَاءِ وَالْغُمُوضِ. In spite of that, it contains difficulty, and it has reached peak in difficulty and khafa and ghumud. It is not so clear, it is not so apparent, it is hidden. It has reached difficulty to its peak. وَإِذَا ثَبَتَ هَذَا. When this has been established, فَنَقُولُ. We will say, إِنَّ ذَاتَ الْحَقِّ سُبْحَانَهُ مُخَالِفَةٌ بِالْمَاهِيَّةِ وَالْحَقِيقَةِ لِجَمِيعِ الْأَقْسَامِ الْمُمْكِنَاتِ وَالْمُحْدَثَاتِ. And then he discusses about the being of Allah, which is the highest reality. So if you cannot understand the essence of your own nafs, your own body, how can you understand? This is the nearest and the most apparent knowledge to us. We are living it. This is I as a being. How can we understand realities which are not, which don't share with us any form of attribute or being, like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We cannot understand based on aql and 5 senses. And then he goes into this discussion. He talks about also the knowledge of space and time. You see how our scholars discussed, and Imam al-Razi, the best we know about him is his tafsir Mafatihul Ghaib, Tafsir al-Razi. In that tafsir also he goes into these discussions. We should explore our scholars, we should explore our legacy. He talks about here bil makani wa zaman, space and time, understanding space and time, again faulty perception, difficulty in perceiving. He talks about understanding the ajsam, the bodies, jism. He says, وَقَدْ حَارَتِ الْأُقُولُ أَيْضًا فِي أَنَّهُ هَلْ هُوَ مُرَكَّبٌ مِنَ الْأَجْزَاءِ الَّتِي لَا تَتَجَزَّأ أَوْ لَيْسَ الْأَمْرُ كَذَلِكَ. The uqul, the intellects have been confused in understanding the reality of jism, bodies. Is a body composed of parts which cannot be divided further or not? This is another mas'ala. So he talks about all these realities which we can perceive by five senses, which we think that we know the best, but the reality is we don't know them as they are. For example, he talks about handasa. He talks about architecture, engineering. He says this is the soundest of mabahith al-aqliya. He says أن أقوى المباحث العقلية باتفاق جمهور العقلاء. The soundest of the discussions based on aql, or the areas, rational areas, is al-mabahith al-handasiyya. The mathematical, the reality is based on shapes, mathematics, geometry, engineering. And then he quotes the books of the Greeks, Kitabu Aqlidus, for example. It is the soundest because we can reach certainty in these areas. In mathematics, we can reach certainty. We can reach in shapes. Yani 90 degree means 90 degree, 180 degree means 180 degree, right? We can reach certainty. But even in this field, he discusses, we'll not go into the details because it requires a bit of specialization in this field. He says that even in this field, which is considered aqwa al-mabahith al-aqliya, the soundest rational field in which we can reach certainty, in reality, if we dig deeper, we cannot reach certainty and objectivity even in this field, which is considered, because at the core, it's based on assumptions. Mathematics is based on assumptions, so on and so forth. And then he quotes, he discusses the details, the angles, and you see how our scholars were well versed in ulum aqliya and ulum naqliya. The narrated ulum, which is the wahi, the revelation, and ulum aqliya, logic, science, mathematics, they were well versed in this. This is what we lack in our times. I'm not saying that our scholars, scholars of Islamic sciences, should also become specialists of these fields, but at least we should have acquaintance with at least the basic foundations of these fields. It's very important. Then he talks about the second hujjah, the second proof, and he discusses the quwwatul basar, the physical eye. And see, he says inna quwwatul basari wa quwwatul basirati mutasawiyatan. The potential of the physical eye and the potential of the inner eye, basira, the eye of the heart, are equal in perception. And then he talks about the weaknesses of both basar, which means the physical eye, and basira, which is the aql. So for example, he says أن حال القوة الباصرة, the condition of the physical eye, مع المبصرات or مبصرات أحوال ثلاثة, with what is perceived by the eye, are three conditions. There are three conditions of this physical eye. الحالة الأولى المبصرات الحقيرة الضعيفة, the things which are very small, like ذرات, atoms. والمبصرات الخفية الضعيفة, very weak and hidden things, cannot be perceived by the physical eye. فمن المعلوم, it is known, أن القوة الباصرة عاجزة عن إدراك أمثال هذه المبصرات وغير واقفة عليها. It is known that the physical eye cannot perceive these things, cannot even understand these maratib, the levels in these things. والحالة الثانية المبصرات القوية القاهرة المستعلية, things which are very dominant on the eye, or we can say which are the zuhur, the appearance is very intense, like the sun, like qarsu shamsi, yani the inner core of the sun. We cannot see it. That's why we always see it black, as Imam al-Razi says. Maybe in our times we can see it with the help of the tools, but it does not mean we can. We are taking the help of the tools. It was unseen for us. This reality was unseen by the naked eye. Now we are taking the help of a telescope or something like that. We see it. So we always see the light coming out of the light coming off the outer region of the sun, not from the core, because we cannot see the core. Why? Because it's so zahir, it's so qawi, powerful, that our eyes cannot take it. So this is the same discussion which Imam al-Ghazali has done here in Mishkatul Anwar, that I can only see the intermediate forms of, perceive only intermediate forms of knowledge or things, which are not so powerful on the eye or very near to the eye, or not very far from the eye, or hidden from the eye, or very small. So I cannot perceive small realities and realities which are very powerful on the eye. This is what Imam al-Razi discusses here. Al-halatu thalitha, the third condition, is al-mubsirat al-mu'tadila, the intermediate mubsirat. This is what I can see. Fil quwwati wal da'fi wal kamali wal nuqsan. The realities which are not so powerful, not so weak or hidden, between that. Okay, so this is limits of sensory perception discussed by our scholars. And then he talks about the aql also. As he said, al-basar wal-basira, the limits of aql. Aql also can only understand the ulum which are intermediate. Things which are too big for the aql or too small for the aql cannot understand it. Okay, like the realities which are beyond matter, aql cannot understand. Forget about Allah, angels. Let's talk about feelings. Can we understand our feelings? The reality of sadness, we cannot understand. We can see the manifestation of sadness. We can see a person crying or sad, on his sadness on his face, but the sadness itself, aql cannot perceive. We cannot perceive feelings. We cannot perceive different qualities which are in the nafs. We cannot. Happiness, sadness, and these are very common examples. Yani there are certain deep conditions of the nafs which are very difficult to understand. The mood swings, different states of the nafs of a human being. Nafs, how does nafs adapt to different conditions? A shock, for example, some nufus are very strong. They adapt to the shock. They take it easily. Some nufus are very weak. They don't adapt to the shock, so on and so forth. So nafs is a reality and world in itself. For example, see, he says, al-ma'lumat al-qahira al-aliya al-muqaddasa, the knowledge which is beyond higher reality, the knowledge which is beyond aql, higher realities, al-muqaddasa, sanctified, وهي الجواهر القدسية, يعني the beings which are devoid of matter. They cannot be understood by aql. والماهيات المجردة عن علائق الأجسام, and the mahiyat, the essences which are devoid of the qualities of the bodies, the qualities which a created body has. These realities are beyond those qualities. وأعلاها, and the highest form of this being is Allah himself. وذات الله تعالى وصفات جلاله ونعوت كبريائه, the being of Allah and his attributes. Okay, then he talks about that. So this was from the great work of Imam al-Razi. We also pointed to Mishkatul Anwar of Imam al-Ghazali, and there are scholars who have studied this mas'ala and discussed about it, written about it. And that's why I said this is one of the primary masail discussed in the books of Ilm al-Kalam and Usul al-Fiqh particularly. So for example, we have this work, famous Al-Aqaid al-Nasafiyya of Imam al-Nasafi, which is a basic text in Aqidah, in Ilm al-Kalam. The first thing which he discusses is epistemology. He says, قال أهل الحق. قال أهل الحق. The people of truth have said, yani the scholars, the true scholars, they say, حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. The realities of things are established. See? Realities of things are established, which means we can understand the realities of things. We don't deny the realities, and we don't take a fanatical position like the West has taken about the realities. We say حقائق الأشياء ثابتة. The حقائق, the realities of things are established. وَالْعِلْمُ بِهَا مُتَحَقِّقٌ. And the knowledge of it is possible. But of course, it does not go into the details. More details come in bigger texts, in mutawwalat, like Imam al-Razi. He talks about how is it possible? Is it possible in entirety, or can we reach near to the reality? خِلَافًا لِلسُّفِسْطَائِيَّةِ. In opposition to the sophists, the Greek school of thought which denied the realities. Sophists were prolific orators. They would mesmerize audience by their oration. There are other qualities. Sophists does not mean they were crazy people who denied the realities. They had some other qualities. We are not going into that. You see, this is the first point. Is knowledge possible? Yes, knowledge is possible according to our own, according to our understanding, according to Islamic understanding. وَأَسْبَابُ الْعِلْمِ لِلْخَلْقِ ثَلَاثَةً. And then he mentions the sources of knowledge. He says the reasons of ilm, the sources of ilm for the creation, for people, for human beings are three. Al-hawasu salima, the five senses. But he says salima, the senses which are safe from any disorder. Because senses, if they experience disorder or any problem, they can deviate from their function. Wal khabaru sadiqu, and the true khabar, the true narration. Wal aqlu, and aql. These are the three sources of knowledge according to our epistemology. Al hawasu salima is the domain of science, understanding physical realities. Al khabaru sadiq is the narrated sciences, like history, for example. In the Islamic ulum, we have ilm al-hadith, a great methodology. We'll talk about that. And aql is philosophy, theology, ilm al-kalam. Okay, and then he specifies the five senses also. He goes into the details. This is the first thing which scholars discuss in ilm al-kalam. In usul al-fiqh also. In usul al-fiqh, the scholars of jurisprudence, they talk about mudrakul ukul, what can be perceived by aql, and they specify the terminology as well. They define ilm, they define dhann, conjecture, they define jahl, they talks about types of ignorance, so on and so forth. This is to lay strong foundations for our epistemology, and by that creating a balanced educational philosophy which can produce good human beings. Human beings who have balanced qualities, a balance between zahir and batin, a balance between apparent reality and hidden reality. Inshallah, in the next session, we will talk about two more things about knowledge, and by this we will summarize epistemology. We'll talk about defining knowledge, definitions of knowledge, and the sources of knowledge, which we said are three: the five senses, the true narration, and the intellect, aql. Inshallah, we will do this in the next session. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to lift the wheels from our senses so that we can see the higher realities. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our both the physical eye and the spiritual eye sharp so that we can understand the realities. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to overlook and forgive the mistakes we are committing in these sessions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us steadfastness in understanding these matters and in practicing our religion. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasanah in dunya and akhirah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by his beautiful names and exalted attributes to cure our sick and to forgive all our dead. Inshallah, this would suffice. And as we have agreed that we will keep a full session for Q&A. So I hope that those who are consistent in taking these sessions, they are noting the points, confusions, ishkalat, problems, questions, so that we can discuss it later on, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala alam, wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabi al-ummi. See you in the next session, bi-idhnillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.